The alarm was already screaming when I opened my eyes. Not the soft chime that wakes you for a shift change. The hard, pulsing siren that means the hull has been breached and something is already inside your ship. I rolled off the cot in the med bay, my hand finding the edge of the table before my legs even remembered how to hold me up. Smoke curled along the ceiling vents. Red light washed over everything, turning the white walls the color of a wound. My name is Daniel Ferris. 3 hours ago I was the medic on a supply run through the outer relay stations. Now I was standing in a dying ship, barefoot, with a fresh line of stitches across my ribs from a training accident that suddenly felt like the least of my problems. The intercom cracked to life. It was Captain Wren, her voice flat and fast, the voice she used when things were already past saving, and she was just trying to buy seconds. Boarders on Deck 4, all hands to defensive positions. This is not a drill. I grabbed the only thing within reach that wasn't a scalpel, a heavy cable cutter from the maintenance rack bolted beside the medbay door. It was meant for slicing through conduit housing, not for fighting anything that breathed. It would have to do. The corridor outside was already full of dust and sparking wire. I moved toward the sound of shouting, toward Deck 4, because that was where the wounded would be, and wounded was my job. That was always my job. Somewhere between the second turn and the third, the ship shuddered so hard I hit the wall shoulder first, and something small and gray skittered past my boots, a piece of the ceiling that used to be part of the ship. I heard them before I saw them. A clicking, layered sound, like 100 small blades tapping against metal at once. Then the smoke parted, and there they were, tall shapes with dark-plated skin, moving in a way that no human body moves, too smooth, too certain, like water finding the fastest path downhill. They were not here to talk. The first one came through the smoke almost gently, as if it already knew the fight was decided. I did not have time to be afraid. Fear is a thing you feel later, when there is time to feel it. In that moment, there was only the cable cutter in my hand and the shape of my crewmate, Owen, on the floor behind me, one arm pinned under a fallen support beam, his face pale and his breathing shallow. I did not decide to fight. My body decided for me. The cutter was heavy and clumsy, but it had weight, and weight is a kind of honesty in a fight. I swung it low, aiming for the joint behind the knee of the nearest attacker, the place where armor plating always has a gap because no engineer, human or otherwise, can armor every hinge. It connected. The creature staggered, and for 1 second I saw something in its posture that looked almost like surprise. Surprise was enough. I dragged Owen free while it recovered, hauled him 3 meters down the corridor into a maintenance alcove, and turned back, just as 2 more came through the breach behind the first. I will not pretend the next stretch of time made sense in order. Fights never do. There was a blade that caught my side, a line of heat that turned into a line of cold, and then a wound that I did not look at, because looking at it would have meant believing it was real. There was the cutter, swinging, again and again, aimed at knees and wrists and the soft seams between plates. There was shouting from somewhere on the far side of the hull breach, other crew members holding other lines, other doors. Hours blurred into each other. I do not know exactly how long it went on, long enough that my arms stopped feeling heavy and started feeling like they belonged to someone else, someone who did not get tired, someone who simply kept moving, because stopping had never been offered as an option. At some point, Owen woke enough to press a strip of sealant tape against my side, his hands shaking, telling me I looked like I belonged in a stasis pod, not standing upright. I told him I would rest when the ship stopped shaking. He said that was not how blood loss worked. I told him blood loss could wait its turn. He was not wrong to worry. The wound along my side was deep, deeper than I wanted to admit, and the tape was doing more to hide it from my own eyes than to actually close it. But every time I thought about sitting down, about letting my knees finally agree with gravity, I heard another crew member calling for help somewhere down the corridor, and my legs simply kept walking toward the sound. By the time the boarding party reached the cargo bay, word had already spread among them, passed in that clicking language I could not understand, but could somehow read the tone of. They were no longer moving like hunters closing on prey. They were moving like soldiers who had stopped expecting an easy fight and started calculating a different kind of risk. That was when she arrived. I felt her before I saw her, the way you feel a storm front pressing against your ears before the sky actually changes. The soldiers in the corridor actually parted, clearing a path the way water clears around a stone. And through that gap walked something taller than the rest, draped in fabric the color of deep water, with armor plating that caught the emergency lighting and turned it into something almost beautiful, if beautiful was a word you could use for a creature built entirely out of purpose. She stopped a few paces away and studied the scene. 3 of her soldiers on the ground, not dead, but not moving either, holding limbs that no longer worked the way limbs were supposed to work. Owen behind me, barely conscious. Me in front of him, cable cutter still raised, blood soaking through a strip of tape that had long since given up pretending to help. I want to be honest about what I looked like in that moment, because there was nothing heroic about it. I was pale. My hands were shaking so hard the cutter rattled against the floor plating every time I shifted my grip. My vision had a soft gray edge creeping in from the sides, the kind of edge that means your body is quietly deciding how much longer it can keep the lights on. I was not standing because I was strong. I was standing because sitting down had simply never occurred to me as something worth doing yet. She raised one hand, and the soldiers around her went still. Then she stepped closer. I braced for the strike. I had nothing left to block with except stubbornness, and stubbornness is not a very effective shield. But she did not strike. She knelt down, slowly, deliberately, the way you kneel to look at something you do not fully understand, and her eyes, dark and layered like polished stone, moved from my face down to the wound at my side. Her antennae, thin and quivering, tilted toward me. She was not looking at me the way a predator looks at wounded prey. She was looking at me the way a physician looks at a chart that does not match the patient standing in front of them. When she spoke, her voice was low, and the words came out in careful, accented trade speech, the kind used across a dozen systems for exactly this sort of moment, when 2 species that share no history are forced to share one room. "That wound is old," she said, "hours old. I can see it in the color of the blood at the edges. It has not been properly closed. There is no clotting weave, no medical seal, nothing but cloth and hope." I did not answer right away, partly because I did not trust my voice not to crack, and partly because I was trying to decide if this was some kind of trick, a way to make me lower my guard before the real attack came. "You have been standing and fighting for how long?" she asked, and I heard something underneath the question that was not quite anger, and not quite curiosity. It was closer to disbelief. "Long enough," I said. My voice came out rougher than I wanted, but it came out steady, and steady was all I needed from it. She tilted her head, and behind her, I noticed the soldiers were watching this exchange with something I can only describe as unease. Whatever their customs were, this was clearly not how these encounters usually went. "Your organ structure is inefficient for combat," she said, almost to herself, the way a scientist mutters observations while examining something under a scope. "Your skin tears easily. Your blood loss rate is high. Your species has no natural armor, no venom, no reinforced skeleton. By every measurement my people use to judge a warrior, you should not be standing." "And yet," I said, because I could not help myself even with black spots creeping further into my vision, "here I am." She reached toward the wound, not to touch it, but to study the air near it, the way I later learned her kind can read chemical traces the way I read a printed page. Her mandibles clicked together twice, a sound I would come to understand meant something close to concern. "You have lost enough blood to end the life of one of my own soldiers 3 times over," she said. "Your body should have folded hours ago. Your limbs should refuse to answer you. Your mind should have already surrendered to the dark. None of this has happened. I do not understand. I want to tell you I had some grand answer prepared, some line worthy of the moment, but the truth is simpler and a little embarrassing." I laughed. It hurt to laugh, a sharp pull along the wound that made my knees buckle for half a second, but I laughed anyway, because the alternative was crying, and crying felt like giving up ground I was not ready to give. "We do not stop when it hurts," I said. "We stop when we decide to stop. That is the whole answer. There is no trick to it. My legs have not been told they are allowed to fall down yet, so they have not fallen down." She stayed very still after that, studying me the way you study a puzzle piece that does not fit the picture on the box, and yet somehow completes it anyway. Behind her, one of the younger soldiers shifted forward, weapon half raised, clearly ready to end the standoff the simple way. She did not even turn her head. She simply raised one hand, and the soldier froze mid-step, obedience so instant it looked almost painful. "You destroyed the leg function of 3 of my blooded guard," she said, "with a tool built for cutting cable, not flesh. You did this while carrying a wound that should have already claimed you, and you did not stop to protect only yourself. You dragged your companion to safety first, before defending your own position. This is not the behavior my briefings described." "What did your briefings say?" I asked, mostly to keep her talking, because as long as she was talking, she was not attacking, and as long as she was not attacking, Owen had a chance to keep breathing behind me. "They said your kind fights like cornered animals," she said, "desperate, chaotic, predictable in their desperation. But a cornered animal fights to survive, and once it believes survival is impossible, it stops. You do not appear to share that limit." I thought about that for a moment, swaying slightly on my feet, the cutter now hanging loosely from fingers that barely remembered how to grip. "Maybe we just have not found our limit yet," I said. "Or maybe we do not believe in stopping until someone proves to us that stopping is the only option left. You have not proven that yet." Something shifted in her posture then, something I could not fully read, not fear exactly, but a kind of recalculation, the look of someone rewriting an equation in real time, because the old numbers no longer explained the result in front of them. She rose to her full height, and for a moment, I thought this was the end, that whatever strange patience had bought me these last few minutes had run out. Instead, she turned to the soldiers behind her and spoke in her own language, quick and clipped, the clicking sound sharper now, edged with something like urgency. "Withdraw," she said, switching back to trade speech so I would understand as well. "All units, return to the shuttle. This encounter is finished." One of the soldiers, the one who had raised his weapon earlier, made a sound of protest, low and questioning. She answered without looking at him, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We came to test a rumor," she said, "the rumor of the wounded human who would not fall. We have our answer. There is no honor in continuing to press an enemy who has already shown us what we needed to see. There is only risk." She looked back at me one final time, and in that look, I saw something complicated, respect tangled together with something close to dread, the way you might look at a fire that has already burned through every barrier you built to contain it, and is still, somehow, burning steadily onward, without spreading, and without dying. "Tell your captain," she said, "that the one who leads my people saw your wound, and understood what it meant. We will not test your kind this way again." Then she turned, robes trailing over the fallen forms of her own soldiers, and walked back through the breach in the hull, the remaining boarders falling into step behind her, with a discipline that looked almost reluctant, as if some part of them wanted to stay and finish what had started, but a larger part of them trusted her judgment completely. I stood there for a moment after they left, not quite believing it, waiting for the trick to reveal itself, for the corridor to fill with soldiers again. It did not happen. The clicking sound faded, replaced by the groan of the ship settling and the distant hum of emergency systems trying to stabilize the hull. That was when my legs finally decided they had done enough. I do not remember hitting the floor. I remember Owen's voice, thin and frightened, calling my name, and the sound of the cutter clattering out of my hand onto the deck plating. I remember the gray at the edges of my vision, finally closing all the way in, soft and total, like a curtain falling at the end of a long performance. The next thing I remember clearly is waking up in a proper medical bay, not the makeshift one I had been treating others in earlier, but the ship's main recovery ward, with actual monitors humming beside me and a proper seal over the wound in my side instead of a strip of tape and stubborn hope. Captain Wren was sitting near the foot of the bed, arms crossed, looking at me with an expression I could not quite place, somewhere between relief and disbelief. "You have been out for almost a full day," she said. "Owen told us what happened in that corridor. He also told us what the alien commander said before she left." I did not believe him at first. Then I checked the hull sensor logs. The withdrawal happened exactly the way he described it. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, my side lighting up with a dull, deep ache that reminded me the wound was real, and had earned every bit of rest I was now finally allowing it. She could have finished us, Ren continued. One more volley from that shuttle would have ended this ship. Instead, she pulled her entire boarding party back because of what she saw in that corridor, because of what she saw in you. I did not feel like a hero lying there. I felt tired, and sore, and a little embarrassed about how close the whole thing had come to going differently. But there was something else too, something quiet and steady sitting underneath the exhaustion, a kind of proof that had settled into my bones, the way only lived experience can settle. We are not as fragile as we look, I said, mostly to myself. Ren almost smiled at that, the first almost smile I had seen from her since the alarms first went off. The report I am filing this week is going to be read by more than a few command staff, she said. There is a line in it I think you will appreciate. Species designation, human, recommendation, avoid cornering them in close combat. Their body appears willing to continue functioning long after every accepted model says it should not. I laughed at that, carefully this time, mindful of the stitches pulling at my side. They are not wrong, I said. Word of what happened on that ship spread quickly through the fleet networks over the following weeks, the way stories do when they carry something people need to believe, especially in a war that had already cost so much. It became less about me and more about a simple idea that people held on to during the long nights that followed, an idea that a single wounded person, refusing to fall, had made an entire alien commander choose caution over conquest. I do not think of myself as anything special. I think about that corridor, about Owen's shallow breathing behind me, about the weight of a cable cutter that was never meant to be a weapon, and about a queen of an empire that had glassed distant colonies, kneeling down in front of a wounded medic, trying to understand something her own biology had no framework for. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can show an enemy is not your strength. It is your refusal to acknowledge your own limits until someone proves those limits exist. She never got the chance to prove mine. And because of that, an entire ship full of people got to go home. I still keep that cable cutter, cleaned and repaired, mounted on the wall of my quarters, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that on the worst day of my life, in the middle of smoke and sirens, and a wound I should not have survived, my body simply refused to stop asking what came next. And somewhere out among the stars, an alien commander carries her own version of that same reminder. A quiet warning passed through her people, about a species that does not know how to recognize the moment it is supposed to fall. I hope she never forgets it. I certainly never will.